what got you guys into metal?
So my first experience with metal came from basically first experiencing music, because I mean I had always grown up around like, you know, classical music all the time, and I thought, you know, sometimes I'd hear songs on the radio and stuff, but I didn't really care for it that much. But then one time my friend gave me this mix CD of a bunch of random stuff, and it's not metal, but it's what got me into it. The band Him was on that mix CD, and I just totally dug it, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And so I as I progressed with listening to that music, it sort of got me more into the other avenues of guitar work and just getting interested in riffs and cool stuff like that. And so eventually I found my way into mainstream metal with Slipknot and Disturbed and System of a Down. And so those have been basically the three major influences as far as my metal musical tastes go, and my own songwriting as far as metal goes. They've been pretty big influences on that. Korn is another big one. Korn's a huge band that I was into a lot at first. During high school, I got more into like the 80s thrash metal scene. So I got really into Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and a lot of Iron Maiden as well. So I did a lot of that in high school, and then it wasn't really until college that I met this kid. He was like all into progressive metal and everything. So I started listening to a lot of that. And more of the technical stuff, and I've grown to really appreciate that stuff a lot. I don't listen to it as much, but when I do, I definitely enjoy it. I really admire the craft and the technicality of all those musicians have, and their songwriting, the structures and everything. I think are incredible, and they put on some of the best shows I've seen.
You went through like the pretty traditional Slipknot, Korn,
yeah, totally,
to the older stuff, and mine was more. I was in middle school, and I was in a class, and there's a kid wearing a Black Sabbath T-shirt. I was like, I heard of this band, but I didn't really know anything about them. And he's like, oh, I'll give you some CDs. So he gave me Metallica's "And Justice for All," Black Sabbath it was like a best of collection kind of thing, and then Iron Maiden's, I think it was Power Slave. And so those three albums were kind of the beginning of it for me, and then I think I listened to "And Justice for All" for like a year straight, and it was like the only album I listened to. So I started checking out like this more heavier side of metal, and I remember it was like within a span of a week, all of a sudden like I was listening to Cradle of Filth and Children of Bodom and stuff. But the real band that like kind of broke me into extreme metal was Amon Amarth. Entombed, Dismember, At the Gates. Anything that came out of Sweden, I felt like you couldn't go wrong. Death metal was really my primary like musical genre for a really long time. I started playing in grindcore and black metal bands, got into like crust punk and that sort of thing. I started writing about music. I got way into post metal, especially sludge metal and doom metal were other ones. That's like the underground sound, is like the post metal, the blackened hardcore as well. Mostly underground stuff is what I would say.
When I was about like 12 or 13, I started listening to a lot of like Iron Maiden, and a lot of 80s hair metal and 80s thrash metal, so lots of Metallica, Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses. And then slowly that kind of shifted, and I started listening to a lot of like 90s metal, like Rage Against the Machine, Korn. I started listening to Opeth. So that was my first introduction. Then I got into Slipknot, and then I went through basically like a big 2-year period where pretty much all I listened to was like modern metalcore. Through that, I discovered more technical bands, The Fall of Troy, Protest the Hero, Between the Buried and Me, Periphery.
I would say actually Mastodon was even a huge tipping point. Between only listening to the most brutal, heavy death metal, I heard Mastodon's Leviathan, got me into like a whole other style of metal.
Well, and they're just a really excellent band because I feel like throughout their catalog, I mean, you can get really grimy, screamy, noisy, angry stuff, and then their most modern music, I mean, is basically radio rock.
They make their singles really, catered to one audience, and then the rest of their music is really like, okay, here's for the Mastodon
like
fans.
like the Hunter, or
Yeah, like the
is like Curl of the Burl, like
Yeah.
that
That's
song
exact-
is like a Black Sabbath song.
It
pretty
is.
much.
yeah.
Sounds like it, yeah.
But then if you listen to anything off of their first 2 albums, those albums, like, they have tons of really crucial heavy tracks.
The first real like big metal show that I went to, it was at the Mayhem Fest in 2008,
Okay,
the first Mayhem Fest, and Mastodon was opening the main stage, and that was the first time I ever heard Mastodon, and I was like, damn, they are loud and awesome. Speaking of that show, though, at the very first Mayhem Fest, Dragon Force was there, Disturbed, and Slipknot. And it was basically the world put all of my favorite bands in a blender and just shot it out in my face with sound and awesomeness. It was the best show ever.
One of the last shows I went to in high school, and it was Protest the Hero was headlining, and with them was the Number 12 Looks Like You, just before they broke up. At the time, Number 12 Looks Like You was probably my favorite band, and they totally killed it. They played all my favorite songs, both from their second album, Mongrel, and from their last album. And then Protest the Hero, I really like Rhodey Walker just as a person, and he's a great vocalist. The Satyricon is just a tiny, tiny venue. And there's a giant pole
Right in the middle.
Yeah, right in the middle.
Yeah.
And so it's a really compact, intimate little space, and the energy from both of those bands is super high, especially Protest the Hero. They just go crazy. They're super fun, but you get a lot of, for such a small place, I feel like they need more room. But the crowd was way into it. It was probably, just in terms of like the feeling of camaraderie and just the fun, I would say that was my favorite show.
I think that's something that I've always really liked about Protest the Hero as well, because they were one of my favorite bands for years and years, and they're still in my top 3 favorite bands probably. But I went to the Hawthorne Theater in Portland, and I saw The Fall of Troy on their farewell tour. And
that's funny. I was at that show.
Were you actually?
Yeah, I was at the show with my buddy.
Did you? So that was probably one of my favorite shows. I had never moshed before.
Okay, sure.
And I had no idea what to expect, and just knowing that I really liked this band a lot, and I'd been into them for a while, and so I came with like no expectations. Ended up really liking all the openers. I think it was like Twin Atlantic and Envy on the Coast were opening up to them, and yeah, that was just like an amazing show. Just seeing Thomas Erik just jumping into the audience, continuing to play guitar like awesomely, and then kind of the end where he threw his guitar away and he just like crowd surfed and like screamed in everybody's faces, and then there's a bunch of like local Portland bands of like guys like our age that I've always really enjoyed. Like Dom and I have gone to see a couple bands like the Odious, Sisyphean Conscience, the Diggers, Hail the Artilect. All these bands are really great, like up and coming like technical death metal bands. Being that this year is kind of coming to a close, what do you guys view as your like top 3 metal releases of 2014? Because there's been a lot of really great albums coming out.
Yeah, this year's been kind of insane. I'd say my top 3. Number 3 would probably be Swans. If you've ever listened to Swans before, it's weird and wild. It's like 2 hours long. It's totally insane. So that goes on there almost just by default, because it's such an impressive feat that Michael Gira can do this like every few years. I would say my absolute favorite album of this year is Behemoth's The Satanist. There's so much emotion in that because of it. There's obviously a lot of personal emotion in there from Nurgle after beating cancer for like the second time and taking those few years off, and I know he ended his engagement with his wife. There's a whole lot of stuff there. The band went through a whole lot of changes, a whole lot of growth, and they sound like Behemoth, but they sound like they have gone through some really, really just terrible stuff that actually has made them grow and become better people. And so their music, even though it's one of the most evil things ever in terms of lyrical content, but it's also one of the most like inspiring and uplifting things in a weird way. Like
and really artistic and poetic.
Oh yeah, like the final speech of the album closer, "O Father, O Satan, O Son," is just it sounds like to normal people like, whoa man, that sounds crazy. You're listening to music like that, but you listen to it and it's just like, man, you feel powerful listening to that music.
For me, I feel like this year, my top 3 picks have been very varied in the styles of music. I really like the new Young and in the Way album. That's had a lot of replay value for me. Really like, just really good crust punk. And then separately, I really like this band. They're called Artificial Brain. They're like I don't know, like atmospheric death metal or something.
They're just pure Gorguts worship. I mean, in the best way.
In the best way possible. So that album is just another one that I just can't get out of my head. And then after that, I would say probably Every Time I Die's new record from Parts Unknown has been lots of just aggressive southern metalcore, just blasting in your face. But yeah, that's probably my top 3.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on Parts Unknown. I don't know if it's my top 3, but it's definitely one that I've liked a lot this past year. I also like Slipknot's new album. I wasn't sure if I was going to at all, but I ended up thinking it was good enough. And then Beartooth's album. What's that album called? Disgusting. Yeah. I've listened to that a lot too, and that's sort of the stuff I've been getting into a lot recently. Is like the newer metalcore scene. I go back and forth between so many subgenres.
Yeah.
And mostly just because there's nothing I don't like as far as metal goes. Right now, what I'm listening to the most is the newer metalcore scene. I really, really like Issue's new album, but as far as that whole genre's albums that have come out in the last year, I definitely think Beartooth's Disgusting tops it for me.
I'm glad we got to sit down and talk about all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's been fun.
It has.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
No problem.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan!